All right, so we talked about this sarcomere and how when we turn on our muscles, what happens is that the thick filament pulls on the thin filament, and as it pulls on the thin filament, it brings the Z bands together, shortens that I band, or that H zone and the I bands, while the A band stays at a constant level. All right? So then the question is, why doesn't it stay shortened all the time? It has to be regulated in a certain way. And all of the regulation happens in the thin filament. So what the thin filament has is the thin filament is made up of a couple of different things. And the most important component is a protein called actin, which makes up these little yellowish balls here. And the reason that actin is important is because actin from the thin filament and myosin from the thick filament are the things that come together and bind between the two thick and thin filaments. Okay? Myosin loves to bind to actin. And when myosin binds to actin, it does this really cool thing, which it shortens, it pulls. And so that's what we're going to use to cause muscle contraction. But if we don't regulate myosin binding to actin, we're always going to be in a shortened situation. So what happens is we have to have a very tight control over this. And so there's 4 proteins that are going to be involved in regulating myosin and actin binding. All right, those 4 proteins are called tropomyosin, which is this long blue protein here. And then there's going to be 3 different proteins that are called troponin. One is called troponin T, one is called troponin C, one is called troponin I. Pretty straightforward, okay? So there's tropomyosin, and tropomyosin just means that it's going to be this protein here. And what tropomyosin does is it's basically, the idea is that it's going to regulate what the troponins are doing. And then when the right signal comes in, and I gave you a hint as to what the signal is just there, then what's going to happen is the troponins are going to pull tropomyosin out of the way, and you're going to open up these myosin binding sites on actin, and now myosin will bind to actin. All right? So what are these troponins? Troponin T is the troponin that binds to tropomyosin. Troponin T binds tropomyosin. Cool. Troponin I is the troponin that sits in the way of the myosin binding site, so that it inhibits myosin binding to actin. Troponin I inhibits. So we've got troponin I blocking the myosin binding site. We've got troponin T holding the troponin in the right spot on the tropomyosin molecule. So what does this C work for? Troponin C is the protein that binds calcium. Okay, so troponin C binds calcium, and that's going to be the signal that's going to move the tropomyosin and the troponins out of the way to open up the myosin binding site on actin and allow myosin to bind to actin. Okay? So how is this regulated? That means that this whole process is regulated by calcium. So all we have to do is get calcium into the muscle fiber, and we can cause the myosin binding site to be opened up, myosin bind to actin, do its little job, shorten the muscle. So how is this regulated? This is regulated. This is where our brains come into it. Okay? Because in this structure, I know this is a really, really confusing picture. Understand that this blue section up at the top, all it is, it's a nerve. And the nerve is coming into the muscle here. What's called the motor end plate, that means that's where we're going to produce these motor movements. So that means motor, in this case, is moving our muscle. And this is just the nerve that's coming in from our brain. Okay, so our brain or our spinal cord is giving us this nerve, and the nerve has a signaling molecule in it. And that signaling molecule, they're just calling ACH here, and that's all you need to know about it. And what this does is when our brain wants to tell a muscle to do something, it says, all right, contract. And when it gives the signal and it snaps its fingers, basically what happens is acetylcholine or ACH is released from the nerve. Now, what does it do? All it does is it opens up these little channels. And so all it does is this ACH, or the red molecule here, just binds to the muscle fiber. And what it does is it opens up these channels, and the channels allow sodium to come into our muscle fibers. Sodium comes into our muscle fibers, and sodium is positively charged. Normally, our muscle fibers are a very negative charge. So their negatively charged membrane is completely what's called depolarized. So it's basically in a negatively charged state. So when this ACH binds to the membrane, opens up the sodium into it, now all of this positive charge comes into the muscle. When the positive charge comes into the muscle, it starts something that we call the action potential. And what that is that's moving the signal from our brains all the way down to the cell where we need it. And the cell where we need it is in muscle. So now you go from a negatively charged to a positively charged muscle fiber. And when that happens, your muscle releases calcium. So what we're doing is we're taking a nerve. The nerve is giving us a signal. Our signal is causing our muscle to become positively charged. And when that happens, the positively charged muscle cell releases calcium. And that's the calcium that's going to cause our muscle to start contracting. Okay? So all I want you to know for this is brain and spinal cord. It's going to have a nerve. The nerve is going to go to a single muscle fiber. When the nerve releases its signal to the muscle fiber, you have sodium, just like salt, come contact into the muscle fiber, turns the muscle fiber from negative to positive. And when that signal gets down into the muscle, it causes our muscle fiber to release calcium. And then what happens is that the calcium binds to troponin calcium, or troponin C. And when it binds to troponin C, what it does is the whole molecule changes its shape. And when it changes its shape, it causes the tropomyosin and the troponins, the other troponins, to move. And now what we've done is we've opened up all of these little red dots, which are the myosin binding sites on the actin molecule. All right? So it's this extremely complex thing that we've tried to explain here. Your brain and your spinal cord are sending out all of these nerves that are going to come to each single muscle fiber. And each single muscle fiber has got one nerve that touches it. And when we want that single muscle fiber to work, we're going to send a signal from our spinal cord out, and it's going to hit that muscle fiber. And when it hits that muscle fiber, it is now going to cause sodium to move into the muscle fiber. And when sodium moves into the muscle fiber, it causes the muscle to shift from negative to positive. And when that happens, our muscle fiber is going to release calcium. And when it releases calcium, the calcium is going to go in and it's going to bind to troponin calcium, or troponin C. And when it does, troponin C is going to change its shape. And now when it changes its shape, it pulls troponin T, I, and tropomyosin all the way up, out of the way, so that now you can see this open myosin binding site on actin. And so this is telling us that all we have to do is increase the amount of positive charge in our muscle, and that results in our muscle contraction. And so this is actually one of the things that people use as a drug, as a very simple way to do, to basically terminate somebody's life. So all you have to do in order to do this is you inject a very toxic substance. It's called salt, and it's called potassium chloride. So if you inject potassium chloride into somebody's body, what happens is the potassium is now going to cause the muscle fiber to become positive. All of the muscle fibers in your body to become positive. They'll all contract. And when they all contract and they can't relax because there's too much positive charge, you can no longer breathe. And the result is that you are dying because you can no longer contract your muscles. So this shift from negative muscle to positive muscle that we do with calcium is so essential to our body that this is the way that some poisons, there are specific poisons that do this, and specific things like lethal injection, that's the way that we take it, people take advantage of this mechanism underlying muscle contraction in order to perform such a a serious thing as that.